Okay, Erev Tov. Continuing with Nechama into Parashat Shalach. I think that Shalach and Lech Lecha are the only two parashiot that begin with an imperative followed by the word Lecha. And I was trying to think today about what the relationship between Lech Lecha and Shalach Lecha is, apropos of nothing in particular. Thoughts on that are welcome anytime. Here's what Nechama has to share with us on the first essay of Parashat Shalach. Fact and opinion in the spy's report. In the previous Sedra, sorry for my voice, by the way. In the previous Sedra, we were treated to an account of the backslidings of the children of Israel, their lack of faith, their preference for onions and garlic rather than the sustenance afforded them by divine providence. Similarly, rather than be borne on eagle's wings to the promised land, they preferred to be guided by the report of spies and secret agents. God does not prevent man from going his own way, even if it be an evil one. Our sages said, man is led on by the path he wishes to pursue. This is a passage in the Gemara, which appears here. The Gemara in Makot 10b cites a statement of Rav Huna in the name of, Rabba bar Rav Huna, some say Rav Huna. One more time. Rabba bar Rav Huna in the name of Rav Huna, and some say it was Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Elazar, that from the Torah, from the prophets, and from the writings, in other words, from each of those three sections of the Tanakh, we have a proof text that bederech sha'adam rotzeh leilech ba molichinoto, on the path that a person wishes to go, on that path one leads and assists him. And the first instance is the story of Bilam, who God seems to not really want to go and curse the children of Israel, but when he indicates that he wants to, God sort of guides him to do so. So this is the mention that Nechama is pointing to, certainly worth exploring in its own right. This is what the Torah meant to imply when it stated Shalach Lecha Anashim. And in order to clarify it further, we have this comment. I believe it's Rashi's comment. Ani eini mitzaveh im tirtzeh shlach. I myself, God, have not given you such an order, but if you want to send, so send. Ani amarti lahem shehi tova, shenemar aleh etchem me'ani mitzrayim el eretz zavat chalav udvash. So, strikingly, while the text opens up, let's go to the Parsha itself. God spoke to Moshe saying, send agents to scout out the land of Canaan. Rashi here is commenting and saying, no, it's not really the case. It was when it says God said to Moshe, that's not the beginning of the conversation. It was not God's direct imperative with no backstory. The backstory is that the people seemed to want it and God didn't want it, or wasn't commanding it at least. God didn't see it as mandatory, but said, if you want to do it, do it. And this, of course, is based on the fact that when Moshe retells the story in Devarim, he says to the people, you came to me and said, let's send scouts or spies. And the Chachamim are trying to figure out, how could Moshe report that the people asked him to do so, when in the story in real time seems to indicate that God told him to do so. And in this case, the Chachamim sort of preference Moshe's version and say, yeah, it must have been that the people came to him and said it. He checked with God, and God said, I'm not commanding you to do it, but if you want to do it, so do it. By the way, we already see, I think, just apropos of the question we always ask, does Nechama innovate anything, or other than organizing and framing, does she kind of add her own insights in a way? One thing that we see here is just her connection between the contents of last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha. That in last week's Parsha, we had the idea that the people preferred something else. They had their own wish of what they wanted to eat, rather than what God was providing them. And so to here, the one way of thinking about the story of the scouts is that they had the divine option, which was just carry on, follow the cloud to the promised land. And they had some preference for something else, which was a scouting mission. And God allows people to follow their path. Of course, when she says here, even if it be an evil one, we have to try to figure out if she's implying that that's what this one is or not. Okay, so she quotes this Midrashic comment and says, but the Israelites preferred to rely on the reports brought by their spies rather than on the Almighty's word, right? So now she already, having said man is led on by the path he wishes to pursue, explained that that's what it means when God says, Shlach lecha anashim, send if that's what you want to do. Now she's commenting on the second half of this comment, which is God further saying, I already told you that the land was good, because it says in Shemot, God already says, I'm going to take you out and bring you to a land flowing with milk and honey. Interestingly, in that pasuk, I can get back to it. Hold on. That pasuk in Shemot, the pasuk says, I will take you out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Yevusi, the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. So it's interesting just to see there that God says, I told you it was good. And the proof text is, I'll bring you up out of Egyptian affliction to the land of these other, currently inhabited by these other nations, flowing with milk and honey. So we have to infer that that's a description of goodness. In other words, that's God paraphrasing God's own words and saying, when I told you it was a land flowing with milk and honey, I meant it was a good land. But the Israelites preferred to rely on the reports brought by their spies rather than on the Almighty's word, God's word, that it was in fact a good land. However, although man is given free will to follow his own devices, he is nevertheless afforded the opportunity to mend his ways and help to steer him clear of pitfalls. So now, in a certain way, Nechama adds her own gloss to this rabbinic statement that's in the Talmud, that on the path that a person wants to go, so is he guided. That doesn't mean that there aren't off-ramps, so to speak, that are made available to him, exits to head on back home through a path of tshuva if he's going on a poorly chosen path. So even if God makes room for people and even extends to some degree, a pathway for them to follow their own will, even if it be not God's will, God also offers them, continues to provide the choice for them to go on a better path. Consequently, the men chosen to spy out the land were those specially suited to the task, the elite of Israel, the leaders of the people. So we must understand the verse which states, Vayishlach otam Moshe, al pi Hashem, kulam anashim rashei v'nei Yisrael heima, right? When it goes on a little further and says, so Moshe, by God's command, sent them out from the wilderness of Paran, all of them being men of consequence, leaders of the Israelites. What it seems like Nechama is saying to us here, and again, I don't think this seems to be her own interpretation, is that the fact that God, when it says, sorry, I'm jumping around here, when it says, by the commandment of the Lord, it seems then to mean not that Moshe sent the scouts by the commandment of the Lord, because God never commanded it according to this reading. It seems almost as though what we're meant to understand is that the choice of the scouts was somehow by the commandment of the Lord. In other words, God was saying, okay, if you're going to do this, pick the best people to do it so that you have the best chance of having the best outcome, right? The correct policy would have been for them to have relied on divine providence. But since they wished to send in advance men to scout the territory, God would not interfere with their design, but on the contrary, help them to carry it out in the best manner possible. The initiative, however, was theirs, not his. So she sort of seems to be suggesting here, God wants to make clear, This is your idea, not mine. I certainly am not recommending it. I'm also not standing in the way of it. And on the third hand, I'm also making recommendations about how to do it in such a way that will have the best outcome. I think this, just by the way, as a kind of an overall reflection on divine providence, is a really fascinating one. The idea that somehow, we have options made available to us in our lives. We have free will. God is not going to stop us from choosing a path which is not ideal, but somehow is going to try to set us up with the opportunities along the way to do it in the best way possible. I think it's just an interesting framework. Okay, that's really section 1. Section 2, the questions to which Moses charged them to bring clear and precise answers are 6 in all. Here she's inviting us to read closely what the charge is that Moshe gives the scouts. Again, we'll go back after we get the list of names. Then we're told, when Moshe sent them to scout the land of Canaan, Vayishlach otam Moshe latur et eretz Canaan, and he told them how to go up into the Negev and onto the hill country, and then 3 verses in which he charges them instructions of what they're supposed to see. That is, see the land, what it is, and she's counting the 6 by the A or B frameworks. The nation that dwells upon it, hechazakhu harafeh, is it strong or weak? Hama'atu imrav, is it few or many? The land in which they dwell, hatovahi imra'ah, is it good or bad? The land, the cities that the residents dwell in, are they more tented, or are they more fortified? And the land itself, hashmenahi imraza, is it fat or lean? Hayeshba eitzim ayin, does it have trees, or is it translated here, is it wooded or not? Okay, I'll just read one more paragraph and then pause for Bracha's question or comment. Their terms of reference were clearly defined, and they came back and gave their answers. The spies unburdened themselves on 3 occasions. Let us study their words carefully. So now she wants to invite us to think about what was their charge and how did they do in carrying it out. Okay, Bracha, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by the words that were used with the guidance to how to see the land, because the first one in each, is it this or that, is the positive. So it's like we're being told to lead with the positive. It's like we're being given that hint that even though it could go either way, lead with the positive, see the land with the positive, experience the land with the positive, and that maybe even if what you're reacting to is the negative side, that you still need to be able to find the positive, like im sort of being if rather than or. Can you see it as good even if you see something that feels negative to you?
Beautiful, as though it's almost saying, is it good even if it's also bad? Is it, fatty even if it's also lean? That it's not simply an A or B, but by leading with the positive, it's sort of saying, can you see that even if in another way it's not entirely true? I think that's a beautiful, beautiful framework. It seems to hold true in every one except perhaps the first one. The people that dwell therein, are they strong or weak? I guess that could cut in both directions. Maybe on the one hand, you want it to be a strong people because that attests to something good about the land. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you may want it to be a weak people for more of a sense of being able to conquer it. So I think that's very interesting. What is the good report in terms of the land and the people? That's a great comment. Thank you. Okay. Immediately on their return, they reported as follows. We came to the land that you sent us, and it does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. Ephes, nevertheless, And by the way, she's going to comment here at the end, in particular on the word Ephes. I was just listening today to a shiur by Rav Yitzchak Et Shalom in LA, whose Torah insights, I think, are tremendous, very close reader of text. And he has a lot more to say about Ephes. He disagrees with the classic translation, so we'll take it with a grain of salt. Nevertheless, the people are fierce that dwell in the land. The cities are very strongly fortified. We also saw the children of Anak there. Amalekites live in the south. So largely, this is a set of answers to the questions, right? You know, what's the quality of the land? What's the nature of the people? What's the nature of the cities? You know, it's somewhat straightforward. Not certainly there's more than just a, you know, check this box, check that box to answer the questions. But okay, Bracha, I see your hand. Go just a little further. The second occasion was in reply to Kalev's soothing words of encouragement. Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. And famous words, Alo na'aleh, right? Let us surely go up, v'yarashnu ota, we will possess it, ki achol nuchala, for we are very much able to overcome it. You have two doublings, Alo na'aleh and yachol nuchal. To which they replied,
I'm sorry, he's saying this, she's saying the second occasion of what?
The second occasion of the people's words, or the scouts' words, was in reply to Kalev's words. She has told us Kalev's words, and now she's going to tell us the people's response. So we haven't yet heard their second response, Dara. Make sense?
Yes, it's just when you're seeing the piece, one piece at a time, sometimes you lose the kind of.
Yes. So the second occasion of the scouts' comments comes in reply to Kalev's words of encouragement. We heard Kalev's words of encouragement. Now we're going to hear the second report of the people. To which they replied, she says, Lo nuchal la'alot el ha'am, ki chazaku mimenu. We can't go up against this people because they're stronger than us. On the third occasion, they unburdened themselves not to Moshe who sent them, nor to their colleague Kalev, but rather, and now she's going to read to us from the subsequent verse, they brought up an evil report of the land by Yotziu Dibata Aretz, the land which they had explored, El Bnei Yisrael, to the children of Israel, that's italicized here, saying, the land which we have thoroughly explored is a land that eats up its inhabitants, Eretz Ochelet Yoshvehahi, V'chol ha'am asher ra'inu betocha anshe midot, and all the people that saw it, all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. Stature here seems, it's actually very interesting. What the word midot here means. Nowadays, when we talk about midot or midos, we talk about character traits. But of course, I think the most original use has to do with literal quantitative measurements, right? Midida or moded has to do with measuring something quantitative. So anshe midot here means people of significant measure. And it's interesting to see how midot has shifted from a quantitative measure to a qualitative character measure. Be interesting to study the evolution of the term. Seems to me to be a good kind of evolution from thinking about what do we measure is not as much quantitative amounts as much as it is qualitative characteristics and attributes. Okay, so her question is, let's just review because we did read it a little choppy. First, the people gave what seems like a somewhat straightforward report describing the land, the people, the cities. Second, they gave essentially an assessment of their own capabilities. We can't go up because the people are stronger than us. And then third, they turned to the entire nation. They'd only been speaking to Moshe or Kalev first. Now they turned to the entire nation and said the land eats its inhabitants, and brought this evil report. What characteristics distinguish their words on these three different occasions? And how do they combine to culminate in sin and rebellion against the Lord? Superficially, their words on the first occasion constitute nothing more than an objective report, answers to the question asked by Moshe. They gave the desired information on the land, its inhabitants and their cities. Indeed, Ramban, it's interesting to see that the analysis of Nechama's essays comments that she very rarely paraphrases, but we've already seen it a few times. It's still her much less preferred approach. She prefers to quote verses and commentaries directly, even if excerpting. But here she does paraphrase again. Indeed, Ramban Nachmanides asks what was wrong with their report. He makes the point that the spies only carried out their instructions. What was their crime in simply proffering the information that the people who live there are a fierce lot? Had they been sent out to bring back false reports? So what was wrong with the first one? However, if we examine their words closely, we shall notice that they were not really so objective. A subjective tinge can be detected in their reply, when they contended that all the good points of the promised land would avail them nothing, because the inhabitants were too powerful and their strongholds too formidable. I think here she's pointing out, there's a question about their first report. It's pretty straightforward that their second and third are already very subjective editorializing. But the first one on the face of it seems like just answering the questions. But she says, no, that's a superficial reading. If you delve deeper, you see that there is and editorializing and going beyond the scouting report they were supposed to bring back, even in that first one. A subjective tinge can be detected, as we read. This is indeed how one of our Spanish commentators, Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, interprets their behavior in his classic work, Akedat Yitzchak. I've just, by the way, started to peruse the Akedat Yitzchak, not something I classically learned. And it's interesting the way it's laid out. Sort of, it's not verse by verse commentary, but it sort of begins with one question and then takes you through midrash and other things by way of answering the question. So this is all part of the answer to the question: did the spies despise the land of Israel, or did they merely reject God's leadership? And then there's lots of lengthy, analysis, various kinds, in order to try to answer the question. And it's within that context that we get this answer. Hold on. It can be compared to a man who says to his agent. Oh, sorry, I went a little ahead. The Akedat Yitzchak. Their crime, he avers, lay in the fact that instead of acting as neutral observers, contenting themselves with the facts, they gave their opinions on the matter. Rabbi Yitzchak Arama brings his point home by the following parable. It can be compared to a man who says to his agent, go to the warehouse and have a look at a talit the merchant has in stock. Examine it carefully for the quality of the wool and linen, for size, appearance, and price, and let me know, as I wish to purchase it. If the agent returns and says, I had a look at it and the wool is pure, it is long and wide, greenish and reddish in color, and the price 100 gold pieces, he has carried out his mission correctly. But if he said, I had a look at it, the wool is pure, it is long and wide, but it is reddish and greenish in color, and it is very dearly priced at 100 gold pieces, then he has exceeded the bounds of his mission and become instead an advisor. This is as a result of inserting the qualifying word but. Seems to me it's also the very dearly priced, but the focus seems to be here on the but. Similarly, the spies qualified their description of the conditions they saw by the significant word nevertheless, right? That was the FS, going back to their first comment. We came to the land, it does flow with milk and honey. Nevertheless, the people are fierce, the cities are strongly fortified, right? As opposed to just saying, we came to the land, it flows with milk and honey, the people are fierce, and the cities are very strongly fortified. That would be an unbiased report, but turns it into a biased report. In their report, there was already a nuance of their own subjective feelings regarding the possibilities of conquering the land, which came out in the open after Kalev's spirited reply to their mutiny. Inspired by their tendentious report, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we, right? So this is already the second. The nevertheless is the first kind of subjective comment. The second seems to be this overall second thing, which is we can't go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. We'll say more about that in a minute, but we'll come to bracha and then to my dad. Go ahead.
So now I have two things.
Great.
The first thing is something that that I've noticed before about the name of the parsha, Shlach. If you say the word Shlach, it has a lot of strength in it. That's going from the beginning. But if you start from the end, from the back of the word, you get Chalash, which is weakness. So it's like a hint as to how much attitude can influence your perception of things. So I think right at the beginning of the Parsha, we get a big hint to that. Another thing that I just noticed tonight, which is amazing to me, is the word avarnu. It's like what's striking about that is we're putting it in past tense, avar. It's not just that we passed through it or passed over it, but that we're actually putting it in past tense. You know, we're not interested in pursuing this.
Beautiful. Okay, so just yes, the haaretz asher avarnu ba, right? In the plain sense, perhaps it's just saying we passed through, but you're saying it more strongly. It hints to the idea that they were saying we're sort of done with this. We've looked and we're finished with this land. We have no interest in engaging it further. I think that's a very nice point. And the shlach and chalash is very, very provocative. Thank you. Go ahead, Dad, and then we'll come to Lance.
If you go back to that first paragraph of what the spies are saying, the paragraph that has the word Ephes in it.
Yep.
Where it says Ephes is nevertheless. And then it says the Gam, and also the children of Anak are there. And Amalekites live there. The 10 scouts are adding something there.
Yes.
These are giants, children of giants. And Amalek, as soon as you say the word Amalek, that's going to make children of Israel afraid.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Even though they defeated Amalek once. So I think there's another negative opinion.
Yes.
In the paragraph.
Very good. Very good. And of course, it made me think about the fact that when they defeat Amalek, it's interesting that the Torah's language doesn't sort of say they trounced them, they are, whatever. It says, Vayachalosh Yehoshua et Amalek vet Amo lefi charav. They weakened them. Comes back to Bracha's point that there's some, they weren't able to totally defeat them. They just weakened them, but they sort of lurk. And they're being reintroduced as this source of fear in the context of the report. So yes, I mean, it's so literarily rich with these kinds of allusions and subtle hints to the, I'm sorry that Rav Shmuel Klitzner, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't written on this passage, because he's very good at kind of the psychological, the Freudian slips, as he talks about, where the word, choice of word or choice of sound already tells us what's going on in the deeper recesses of the subconscious that influence how people are choosing to speak or act. So this feels very evocative of his approach. Lance, go ahead.
Okay, number one, the emphasis here is on the majority opinion versus a minority opinion. And if I can think tangentially and laterally, I would suggest the oven of Aknai is almost an identical parallel, in which you have an object and you have a majority and a minority of basically two sets of people. Really, one person is on the left, but looking at an object and they see it from two opposing positions. One, the object is pure, the other, the object is impure. The rabbis say the object is impure, and the rabbi says, no, it's pure. And the rabbi brings in God and miracles in order to prove that he's right. And the rabbis reject that. They can't see it. And here you have the people, the Hebrew people, Jewish people, and they're complaining about, the food and stuff like that. and they haven't seen the manna. They haven't seen the cloud. They haven't seen Sinai. I mean, it's like they're blind as bats. And if you read the Oven of Aknai, you will find that the rabbi is excommunicated by the majority. However, at the end, the very end, the leader of the rabbis is killed. Most people don't read it that far, I don't think. But the point here is, if you read this to the end, Joshua gets to the promised land. And the promised land is a land of milk and honey, and also, I think, unleavened bread. But the magic scene, for me at least, is Joshua book 5, where Joshua sees this giant warrior, and he says, "Whose side are you on?" And the warrior says, "I'm not on anybody's side." Turns out to be the Lord of hosts. And then he finally tells Joshua, "Okay, God is on your side and you're going to win everything." And Joshua goes on and wins. Here, the situation is that the Israelites are going to wander in the desert for 40 years. And how does that happen? It happens because it's not only the golden calf, but you also have this situation with the spies, where the Hebrews are, the Hebrew people are really being punished for behavior. And the final point I'd like to make is, how do you know that you have free will? How do you know? How do you know that everything I've said, everything you've done, everything in a Zoom, everything is led up to the Zoom thing with the pandemic and all that stuff? How do you know that God isn't pulling the strings? And there is one in the Torah.com, there is somebody who argues that God set this whole thing up. So those are just some tangential, lateral thoughts from a tangential, lateral mind.
Thank you. As far as I know, there is no way to know if we're truly exercising free will, and that's okay. But no, I think it's interesting. I think I appreciate zooming out for the broader context and sort of the end of the story. And I think that does color the story in some way. In fact, Rav Et Shalom, who I referenced earlier, was talking about the complexities of reading the Bible as omniscient readers. We know what the outcomes are, and it sometimes we lose something when we don't sort of journey through the story naively, not knowing what's going to happen. So just great thoughts. Dara, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So I have problem with this, with a piece of this parasha every year that it comes up. In the instructions that Moshe is giving them in the guidance, because especially with Hatovahi im Ra'ah, it's like even it's if he could be considered that it would be Ra'ah. It's like he seems like he would be giving them like a pitchon peh, like for the other side, and even the other questions, like it should be relevant, but he's asking like these really specific questions, and like if Hashem is in charge and they're leading them through, and we if they would have Amunah and that he's going to fulfill his promise, and so the answers would be irrelevant anyway. But specifically the one with like Hatovahi Imra'ah is even like to consider that there might be such an option.
Yeah.
They always had a problem with that. It's like almost like the outcome would be, would almost be like as expected with that charge.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's what it makes me think of, which is not a direct parallel, but I guess what it evokes, and not as necessarily a defense of this framework, but just a reflecting what feels slightly analogous to me. I was listening to a discussion about some of the recent graduation speaker at CUNY Law School, and the commentator was talking about the question of free speech and hate speech, and when does something cross over the line, and when is it better for us as a people, as citizens, to say all free speech should be protected, even if we vehemently disagree with it and consider it wrongful, but it's free, and when is it considered to be hateful, dangerous, and no longer protected? So it feels in a certain sense here like, whose side is Moshe on? But it's almost as though he's sort of taking this, he's sort of saying, in the framework that you, the people, right? Almost the way God responded to him, saying, okay, if you want to send. So then Moshe seems almost though he's following through and saying, okay, if the framework is we're scouting, so then any outcome could be on the table. The scouting somehow means we're treating the land like a black box. So anything's on the table. And here are when you go scout out a place, here are the questions you need to ask. He knows, and the people, may have listened or heard at some point an indication that the answers to these questions are already told to them. But somehow he's sort of, almost as though he's enhancing their free will by presenting to them that any possible outcome, has to be, checked for. It's not. I agree with you. It makes one uneasy, and it feels like a kind of a setup or almost disingenuous in some way. How can Moshe allow himself to say imra'ah, good or bad? He heard and he takes God at God's word. I think it's a really fascinating question. I appreciate it.
I would love to know what he was thinking.
What's that, Dara?
Would have loved to know what he's thinking,
Yes,
to be able to ask him, what were you thinking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Since we're at 9:30, I'm going to just zip through to the end and take any last comments. So, okay. So the people have said, we can't go up. This is their second comment against the people, for they're stronger than we. Chazaku mimenu. Here it is interesting to note, says Nacham, the differing midrashic and literal interpretations approaches to the interpretation of the word mimenu, which in Hebrew can refer to either the first person plural, than us, or third person singular, than him, right? Either than we or than him. The plain meaning of the text, right? We can't go up against the people, for they are stronger, mimenu. The plain meaning of the text, lost it, is obviously they are stronger than we. We can't go up, the scouts are coming back and saying we can't go up against the people because that people are stronger than we, our people, this people. However, the Midrash cited by Rashi states, they meant it in reference to God that is above. In other words, they implied that the people of the land were stronger than God, interpreting mimenu in the third person. This Midrash is saying that what the scouts were saying is, we can't go up against this people because they are stronger than God, right? In a sense, it's a response to Kalev, saying we can, right? And the answer is we can't because they're stronger than everything we have on our side, us and our God. What prompted the Midrash to adopt such an explanation, which seems so far removed from the plain meaning of the text? The Midrash apparently aims to bring out not merely what was on their lips, but at probing deeper and unfolding their inner thoughts. In verse 29, they had already made the point that their cities were heavily fortified and that the people were strong, a fact that Kalev had not denied. He merely encouraged the people by telling them that in spite of these obstacles, they were well able to overcome them. Kalev does not explain how they were going to achieve this and by whose aid, but presumably implies that they should rely on divine help. It was this trust in God in which the spies were repudiating. They said, for they are stronger than we, but repudiation of divine providence was implicit in their behavior. What they really meant was, therefore, they are stronger than God, in whom Moshe and Aaron, Kalev and Yoshua ultimately placed their confidence. Right? And of course, this sort of takes us back to our opening comments about, choosing to follow divine providence or follow their own way. And here that sort of they were already so sure that divine providence wasn't going to save them that they, even claimed that the land was stronger than what God could help them conquer. As is often the case, the homiletical and literal meaning of the text do not contradict, but rather complement each other, revealing different levels and shades of meaning, right? That, yes, they were saying stronger than us, but what they were thinking or feeling was even stronger than God. That was the second comment. On the third occasion, the spies make no bones about the matter and unrestrainedly reveal their feelings, casting to the winds all pretense of objectivity. Right, and repeating this section, they brought up an evil report of the land which they had explored, saying the land is a land that eats up its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of a great stature. By the way, just before we see her comment on this section, Rabbi Shalom doesn't read it this way, that it's sort of just a gradual uncovering of what the people really, really felt all along, but that they're impacted by the give and take. And so, when Kalev sort of reassures them, they get more panicky. And that actually, if he had just sort of let it lie, no pun intended, let it lie with their first description, and not sort of pushed back, but just let it sit for a little while, maybe they wouldn't have gotten so worked up. And that almost in some way, his confidence stirred their unconfidence, so to speak, which is an interesting reading. But Nechama's point is that no, they had false confidence, feigned confidence from the get-go, or in their opening, but all along their deepest sense was a total lack of faith and security. Just took a little time for them to really let that out. Now she comments, here we are faced by an obvious contradiction in their statement. If the land consumed its inhabitants, how did there exist there men of great stature? The two explanations are advanced by commentators. One, Sforno, who suggests that what they meant was that the land and climate were so detrimental to health that only the fittest, the strongest, could survive. Only giants and men of extraordinarily physical resistance could live, after the manner of natural selection. An interesting comment. Other commentators, however, explain that their report was a mixture of fact and fiction. Like all propagandists aiming at giving a false and distorted picture of events, they were not aware of the tendentiousness of the picture they painted or of the contradictions it contained, right? So as they got, again, driven by their lack of faith in God somehow, and therefore not believing they could do it, and therefore needing to convince the people that they shouldn't do it, they wound up overselling the danger of the land. And so they said two things which were implicitly contradictory. It eats up its inhabitants, and there are mighty people there. That seems to be the second approach, not the Sforno's approach. As Rabbi Yitzchak Harama points out, it was not just a case of cowardice. They had actually rejected the promised land, as stated in 1431. But your little ones, which you said would be a prey, them I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have rejected. Again, this is right. This is a little later on in the Parashah, and what Rabbi Yitzchak Harama seems to be saying here, right? So this is after everybody got very upset, and the people say, let's go back, and God gets angry and tells Moshe, I'm going to destroy them, and Moshe defends and secures some level of forgiveness from God, and God says, okay, but still this generation is not going to go into the land, only the next one, and says further, right, no one will enter the land which I swore to settle you in except Kalev and Yehoshua, and your children, the ones you were afraid were going to be carried off, I'm going to allow them to enter, and they will know the land that you, this generation of adults, have rejected. So the reading of Rabbi Yitzchak Harama seems to be like you have already rejected, sort of relates to Bracha's comment of Avarnu, right? From the get-go, you made it clear that you didn't just not think we could do it, but you kind of had decided that you didn't want to do it. Harama concludes, it is this rejection of Eretz Yisrael which is responsible for our tribulations and exile, for our being a reproach to our neighbors and a scorn and derision unto them that are round about us. Never recover our spiritual and physical equilibrium until we return to it. It's strong words for today in our relationship to Medinat Yisrael or Eretz Yisrael, however we want to take it. Any last questions or comments before we say goodnight?
Yeah.
Steve, please go ahead.
Writing
Hold on a second, Dyer. Hold on. Just going to Steve, and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, I just wanted to go a little further in the Parashah. I know it's not the subject of our discussion today, but God is willing to condemn an entire generation for their act of faithlessness. But this generation said we were wrong. We want to go into the land. We'll go into the land and fight the inhabitants. And you mentioned that God gives us off ramps in which we can seek forgiveness and be forgiven. God forgave the children of Israel for the golden calf. So why was he so severe in this instance?
Beautiful question. Beautiful question. I'm not sure I know the answer. Nechama does have an essay on that section, the Mapilim. Those people who went forward, and in what scene she asked the same question. I don't remember her answer, but I'll try to collect it and send it your way, because it's such an important question. It seems like the people truly are penitent and want to then turn and do the right thing, and then the option seems to be foreclosed. And why does, in some instances, God sort of take them back wholeheartedly, and in some instances foreclose? I think it's a great follow-up question to the framework we laid out at the beginning of the chapter. So thank you. Dara, go ahead, and then Bracha.
So one quick question and one comment. Yeah, I was asking, when was Rav Yitzchak Arama writing? When is he from?
I think 15th century. I'm going to check it right now. Hold on. I was just looking at his information. Yeah, a Spanish rabbi in the 15th century.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely food for thought. Responsible for our tribulations in the galut, the rejection that. But I really was fascinated by Rav Et Shalom's comment that you said that Kalev's confidence stirred them. I mean, not so much that specifically, but the idea that they were already arguing, like, in other words, that they hadn't spoken among themselves, seemingly, to decide what they were exactly going to report to Bnei Israel upon their return. So then it's like, once you're arguing, it's like they want to just win the people. Human nature would be like to win the argument.
Yeah.
And so not responding as a whole, as a whole unit, to their mission, but it's like now that this division happened, so then they just want to win the argument.
Yeah, I think that's a very good gloss on his reading and interesting way to think about it. Thank you. Bracha, go ahead. Last word.
Yeah, I found Dara's question very interesting, and I started thinking about why would Moshe do something like that. And what came to me is that Moshe is always in defense of the people. So I'm guessing that Moshe sensed this in the people and mentioned it almost as a way of being able to later say, well, I had mentioned this option, so maybe they just went with it.
Good. So yes, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was interrupted with a charusa. But you asked at the beginning about Lech Lecha and Shalach Lecha.
Yes.
And I think it's intentional. I mean, Lech Lecha is told to Abraham, go for your own sake. And this journey to Eretz Israel could have been for your own sake also. That's the potential.
Yes.
Potential with Abraham was failure. He could have refused, or the potential with the spies was achieved by Yehoshua and Caleb, but not the others.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful.
It's interconnected.
Yes, absolutely. Thinking about how the personal dimension, the human dimension in responding to a mandate impacts the outcome. Absolutely. Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. As you hopefully saw in the email, I'll be in Israel, God willing, next Monday night at the wedding of a daughter of shul members who grew up in the Bayit. Pamela Canner. So wish me luck. It's a bilingual ceremony. I'm going to be attempting to say everything in Hebrew and in English. So it'll be a new experience. And we sent along already an essay from Korach to take a look at. I'll try to see if I can catch the one in response to Steve's question and send it along to everybody as well. And we'll be back, resume literally 2 weeks from tonight. So love to all, mom and dad, and good night to everybody.
Good night.
נסיעה טובה.
Yeah.
Bye.